when I was preparing for this interview, I was reading a book and so on, and I think you're someone who wears different hats. Uh, and so I'm curious, how do you introduce yourself when you meet someone new? Like, what is the guise you take?
So obviously my name, Karena de Souza. Uh, but it kind of depends on who I'm speaking with. But most often in a somewhat professional setting, I'll introduce myself as a futurist. So I basically position myself as someone who thinks about what's going to happen 30 years from now and try and work towards that.
I think something that you say in your newsletter as well, like a future of work strategist.
Yeah.
I'll just admit it. I don't know anything about the future of work. Like, I'm just going to put it very bluntly. What is the future of work as opposed to what it is right now? Like for a beginner like me.
So future work, I mean, you could call it anything, to be honest. But somehow the name future of work came about around the 2015s to explain how the way of work was going to be substantially different in the coming decades than it had been, say, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, the tail end of the industrial era. And a lot of that had to do with the way technology was coming in and changing the way we work. And for me, it started off as being a technology change that's going to change the way you physically do work. But it became so much more than that, in that this particular technology is actually going to cause an era change. So let me backpedal a second, because now I'm already launching into something relatively complicated, right? But if you think about it, the plough changed the way mankind lived, right? So before the plough, men were hunter-gatherers. And with the development of the plough, we became agrarian. We stayed, instead of being nomadic, we started, settling in one area. It changed the way politics happens. It changed the way families developed. It changed so the whole bunch of society that changed around the agricultural era. And if you go back in time, you'd probably see similar significant technologies that made similar impact along the way. Well, right now, we're coming out of what we call the industrial era. The industrial era started off with the steam engine. And if you look at the impact of the steam engine, it did something very similar. It was a technology, and originally all it was supposed to do was change instead of having hand looms, something we're very familiar with in India, right? Instead of having hand looms, it became mechanical looms so that they could actually they could make fabric faster. But the development of that then started bleeding out into other parts of society. It then became the car, then became so many other it impacted so many other areas of life. And very, very soon, or actually not that soon, it took a good couple of decades, people started changing how they lived, how they managed the economy, how they managed their families. They moved from being multi-generational, living in one place for 500 years in the same village, to having to move to the city so that they could have factory work, taking their children with them, but leaving the grandparents behind. So it changed society completely. And right now we're seeing a similar shift. So we're seeing the way, when I started doing this, there was no such thing as ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT, literally, even in 2021, I wasn't considering ChatGPT as being one of the big things that would come along. But you're beginning to see how AI now is the whole internet slash cloud slash ChatGPT. Like, it's beginning to change the way we work. And part of the change was supposed to be, just the same way the plow was, it was supposed to be a way of making life better for us. But in making it better for us, it also changed the way we do things. And so future of work is this catch-all phrase that started off by saying, this is how technology is going to change the way you, Ishan, are going to work. And it's becoming this bigger thing. Too complicated, right?
Yeah. No, I mean it's a lot, definitely. I think
It is a lot. it's not an easy topic to like even at a cocktail party. It's not the stuff I lead with.
But it's so interesting in that like you can just take it, like you can just take it from there in so many different ways.
It's like I said, it really started off with my oldest son was choosing his subjects for his last year at school, and at the same time I was actually I don't know if you know, Bitcoin just crossed $100,000 valuation, right? Well, I just discovered Bitcoin at that stage, and it was $180 a Bitcoin. Okay, so this tells you like since when I've been thinking about this stuff. So I was basically into the future of money. Apple Pay didn't exist. They were talking about it. The Apple Watch hadn't yet come out onto the market. They were talking about it. Tapping your credit card was what I was writing about. So that's the era in which I was following what was going to happen with the future of money, the fact that money was becoming more digital. And I started seeing things happen in the investment industry that confused me. Like, you know, in my industrial era mind, it did not make sense. And so I started following that thread, and the thread led me into this conversation that I'm having with you right now. It's like what I saw happening in what I thought was an incredibly secure industry, which is the finance industry. I'm like, everyone needs money to survive, right? So if I tell my child to go in and do something in the finance industry, he's got job security for 20 to 35 years. And yet what I was seeing was that the banks around me were letting people go, tellers, and their share price was not dropping because they were taking on IT staff. Because at that time, they were building what we now know as the banking apps. So it's like this is when M-Pesa and stuff like that was coming out. And so they were beginning to move away from using manpower to using technology power to fuel and funnel and speed up the number of transactions that could be handled. And so I started saying that. I'm like, wait a second. So what am I doing advising my child to go into finance when finance could be almost like a death knell for him, right? Like he could spend all this time investing his energy in 4 years of education just to come out and not have a job on the other side. And so that's when I started paying attention to, okay, then what is possible? Like, what should I be advising him to do? You know? And so that's how this all started for me. Very selfish. I'm just a mom looking after her kids.
I have a question though. Okay, let me backtrack. Do you think that jobs will be lost? Because I think that's the primary conversation, even if we take it now to the AI bit that you said earlier. But or do you think that jobs are just going to change? Like, I feel like it's very pessimistic view to just say that jobs will be lost. I feel like with new technologies, there are always new avenues that open up that are required to support that, new technology. And so, is it all doomsday as I think the media tries to portray it?
So like I said, when I first started doing this and I'd go out and talk to parents, this is like 2015, 2018. And that was exactly the reaction. It's like, so tell me, what should my child do? Like, they're taking away all the jobs. And my response used to be, well, how many of y'all rode in here on a horse?
I love that. Oh, I love that.
Okay. So everything has an adoption cycle. At the beginning, it's very cutting edge. It's very new. Quite rapidly, as you will see from your use of the internet, things become utilitarian. They become a utility. They become an expectation to the point that government is expected to make sure that this service is up and running 24/7. But at the beginning, that original state, it's always a moment of fear. Now, that being said, some of these things will take and some of them won't, right? But just going back to like what we're talking about in terms of technology, at the beginning, when the car came in, everyone was fearful of the car. They had the same conversations about the car, about it being on roads, about it sharing the road with horses and carriages, as we're having about ChatGPT. Ethical conversations about, is this a right thing? Should we be having this here? Is it going to disrupt society? And so you can probably follow those same conversations because it is a threat. It's a threat to the way we are. It's a threat to the way our systems are, our expectations. All the frameworks we have exist because of what we already know. not because of something we don't yet expect, right? And ChatGPT is forcing us to redefine all that. It's forcing us to look at the world differently and have different expectations. And over time, people will move. I use Excel all the time. I grew up, when I was in university, we still had slide rulers. We did not have Excel. Like I did all my, I'm a math and computer science grad. I did all my exams using the logbooks. Right? So it's in the space of my lifetime, this has happened. In the space of my father's lifetime, when he was born, they were still putting down railroad track in Uganda. He flew for the first time only 10 years before man landed on the moon. And now we're already planning to put people on Mars, right? And so in his lifetime, which was 93 years, he knew that they were sending, they were testing rockets from Mars. So it blows your mind as to what is possible in a short space of time. But let's go back to that saddle and the guy who used to look after the horses. He either became a mechanic or he ended up working on airplanes. The airplanes became rockets. I mean, you talk about the jobs going away, but look at the huge industries that have actually then exploded around this concept of this, the automobile showing up. So
again, I think maybe it's a generational thing. Like I hear a lot of older people saying a lot of the nihilistic, I think that's the word, things around this technology, the fact that it's taking away people's jobs. And I mean, that might be true. I want to sympathize with people who are losing their jobs.
Let's take something in your lifetime. Do you use Google Maps?
Yeah, a lot, yeah.
Does your dad use Google Maps?
Of course. And I remember, okay, I continue.
Did he grow up using paper?
I think, yeah, of course he did. Yeah, he did.
And yet now I don't think he could survive with a paper map if he could find a paper map to buy. I'll go into a hotel now and I'll ask them for a paper map at the front desk, and most of them say, sorry, we don't have them anymore. They've stopped creating them. And that's what in the last 15 years. That's not that old.
I love that you chose that example, because I remember the first time we were all my family, we used Google Maps. I remember we had to go to a mall to catch a movie, and we were it was a new mall or something. We didn't know where it was, and so we were let's try this Google Maps thing, and now it's such an integral part of my life. We travel a lot.
I
my
like
family
the word
travels.
integral. Yeah.
Yeah. It really is. It really is. I use that very
yeah.
deliberately. It's such an important part. We travel a lot, and so I think every week or so we end up using Google Maps. It's sort of automatic. I love that.
Google Maps, so ChatGPT or whatever AI you're going to use is going to become that integral in your life within the next 5 years. Because once you know what is possible, once you know how much smoother your life can be, if you enjoy and figure out how to leverage this technology, why wouldn't you?
Right now we're seeing the maybe beginnings of AI being introduced into search engines itself. I mean, I can just speak to Google. I don't know how accurate it is, but Gemini, their AI summarizes whatever you're searching for and gives you a succinct answer. I mean, I think the interesting thing about AI is that it's a supplementary thing that can sort of be pasted on everything. I know people do that unnecessarily as well, but it's something that goes into every different technology that we all use. And so I'm interested to see how that sort of plays out.
And so I don't know if this is the way you wanted to have this conversation anyway. I know we're kind of going all over the place, but it does come together. So one of the things to recognize also is that we are literally in the first days of AI. Similarly, I remember being in the first days of the internet. And so there will be players who will show up who will not make it through. And so you can either look at phones or you could look at browsers. You could look there are just because something exists doesn't mean it is going to be the end runner. It's the front runner right now, but it doesn't mean it's always going to be. So Eastman Kodak is the company that actually developed digital photography. they never realized what they had available. They held the patents. And because the phones came out and they started using like digital photography and stuff like that, and they couldn't keep up, the whole company, that company which had been around for over 100 years, just went poof, right? I mean, like when I grew up, you know how you talk about Instagram moments or like, being able to go and get an Insta shot? In my day, it used to be Kodak. Like, this is your Kodak moment. This is like, stand here and you'll get the perfect Kodak photograph. That was like the lingo in my day because that's what you did, right? And it's like, so, but nowadays, you like, who would ever think of using Kodak as when you're talking about photography? You don't. Similarly, if you look at the first phones, Nokias, right? Now they're Apples. So sometimes you wait for the first somebody to come in, figure things out. Hopefully they do well. Sometimes they don't and they fail. But then someone learns from their mistakes and starts developing a more robust product. So, whether it's Bitcoin or whether it's browsers or whether it's, phones or whatever it is, I tend to hold off. I'm not a super early adopter myself because this is the lesson I've noticed, or this is the pattern I've noticed. And so I'll wait for things to settle a little bit. So like, for instance, in the 2020s, NFTs came out and everyone's like, oh my God, invest in this. You'll be a super millionaire. Well, not so much anymore, right? Like, but that was a very interesting use of that technology, but it didn't survive or it hasn't persisted. So similar, so like, so you'll have little iterations like that. And over time, in this new world, there will be some technologies that will persist. There will be some companies which will catch the mood of the public better than others. I mean, you can understand why Apple does that versus, a clunkier old someone else. Like, you'll just find companies that find the pulse and of their buying public, and they will be the ones who will carry on and have more persistence and become the future technology companies, going forward. So so for me right now, I'm using Perplexity because I'm finding that Perplexity kind of blends Claude and ChatGPT. Then so like I'm getting a little bit of the best of all worlds out of Perplexity rather than putting all my eggs in the ChatGPT basket. So that's the way I do it.
I'm curious, when you say that you use Perplexity, how do you use it? I know Perplexity summarizes things. I mean, I use it in university for that. I put a paper in, I get the summary, and so I don't have to read the paper. But how do you use it?
Things so like different use cases. So for instance, when I hit the 3-year mark for my newsletter, I kind of created a set of prompts. What I wanted to see was the connections, or how had my writing changed over the 3 years. It was what I was trying to figure out. And so there is a constraint on it in that you can only put 4 files in at a time. But I fed it like 4 files at a time. You do the math. But I started tweaking the prompts, and I basically asked it for a start to come up with a synopsis of each article that I offered it to say, okay, what do you think I was talking about in this article? Did it match what I thought I was trying to get across to my audience? What were 4 or 5 keywords that it would have picked out from this? And then I can't remember. There were 2 or 3 other questions that I asked. Oh, and I think I asked it to see if there was any synergy in the 4 that it was looking at. And then I put everything in a spreadsheet, in an Excel spreadsheet, because I'm that old. I'm still a spreadsheet goddess. And then I started looking for patterns in there, and it raised some really interesting patterns for me that I hadn't recognized. So one of the things it did, I expected to see climate. I expected to see, parenting or raising future ready leaders, and obviously future of work. But one word it came up with constantly was sustain. And I'm like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'm doing, climate. But it was the essays on which it was saying sustain that caught my eye. A lot of them were the rest issues. You know how I have the rest issues every 7th issue? So it found sustain there. And it found sustain, obviously, in climate. It found sustain in the writing prompts. Like, when I was doing things to help people write, and then also sustain when I was talking about community. And so to me, it changed the way I relate to the word sustain now, because it's giving it so much more gravitas and so much more depth. So it seems like it's a truer element of what I write. How do I sustain people, whether it's in community or as a culture or as a, generation over generation. So I thought that was really interesting. That blew me away. So that's one way I've used it. So what I did actually, so if you go and you look at my website, in my Substack, I've now got something on the top line called Directory of Topics. I actually created a bingo card of all the major topics that it popped up. And so that's how I came up with it, because I was like, how does someone otherwise come into my newsletter, have 160 newsletters to pick from? And how do they pick what they want to read? I can't expect anyone to come in and read from beginning to end. But I figure if you do it this way, then you can get like, okay, I only want to see about climate, or I only want to see about children, or I only want to see about travel. Then this was one way of inviting them to engage with my work, but get a cross section.
I mean, this really helped me when I was prepping for this. I could choose in those different verticals. I mean, so interesting that you brought up your newsletter, because I think that is how we connected. I sometimes forget that through writing. Where does writing like fit in for you in your story? I know you have a post on this. For those listening, I will link it all below. But I want to know your writing journey. I feel like it's really the glue that holds all these different things that you do together.
That is so funny, because I'm still trying to come to terms with the fact that I might be a writer. To me, I'm such a STEM person. My background is math and science. I never considered myself a writer. And so it was only coming in and doing that first, but I did consider myself a share of knowledge. So that is why I got into podcasting. That's why I got into video. It was all about, how do I take my message and make it accessible to other people? But, I definitely do not have the skill set to say I'm an amazing writer, or, I'm like someone's going to pick up my book and go, "Oh, that's such a fantastic read, Karena." I'd have a lot of imposter syndrome around that for sure. Because that is such a new persona for me. So
let me just say that you are a writer. If you needed another person to say it, let me just tell you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. No, so interestingly, so writing came up for me when I started doing strategy as part of my IT job. And I came across this concept of scenario planning. So scenario planning is a strategy tool where you try and figure out what's going to happen in the future. And a lot of Fortune 500 companies use it in order to sense signals that are not apparent. So an ideal one, for instance, would have been if a company had figured out that there was a possibility of a pandemic in 2018, wouldn't they be way ahead of the game? Right? So it's and the signals were there. So the signals of maybe these countries are not well prepared, or because in the past we've had similar epidemics, but they haven't become pandemics, right? So what turns an epidemic into a pandemic is an actual process problem. It's not an illness problem, because if we could have contained it correctly at the beginning, it would never have grown to the stage of being a pandemic. Make sense? Yeah. So if companies had that vision to say, all right, this is what are the possible threats in the future, they could have made plans on how they would address it. And so scenario planning is kind of that. So it started off, I became aware of it in my company, that the methodology had kind of been honed by Shell, in the 1970s. It's I won't say loosely based off. I think it's actually quite aggressively based off war games, which is how armies prepare for potential wars, right? So they basically say, what if this happened? What if that happened? What if the enemy comes over that hill instead of the one we expect them to come over, right? So you've kind of got that mentality going. And anyway, so we can go into a whole episode on one scenario planning, because I absolutely adore it. But it is a tool that most major Fortune 500 companies use in order to prepare themselves for what might come in the future. We're talking like Ford, we're talking like, like Morgan Stanley, which are like, like a zillion of them now use it. And governments use it. All right. And what that allows them to do is take a company that exists, let's say in 1990, and still be relevant in 2025, where the technology is no longer the same, generations are no longer the same, consumerism is no longer the same. So what allows a company to make that transition? So they're basically planning ahead. And what I loved about it is the way you do it is you actually come up with these weird and wonderful possible futures, and you write them, you write stories about them. And so that's where I started loving words. That's where I started loving this concept of storytelling, because it was so different from my work as a programmer. As a programmer, you wrote something and the computer did exactly what you told it to do, even if it had a bug. If you had a bug, it actually exactly did what you told it to do, and you would go wrong. But so this was such a different experience for me, like this whole, invitation to be creative. And so that's actually where I first fell in love with writing and storytelling and stuff like that. But actually, just before I carry on talking about that, one of the things I will say is, once I learned this skill set, this is something that we actually now use to run our family. And it is one of the reasons why I'm quite adamant. Like, I keep trying to teach it to other people, because I feel like if a Fortune 500 company can use it to be relevant 30 years from now, why are we not teaching this skill set to teenagers? I feel teenagers, if they learn the art of watching signals, being able to pivot, being able to prepare, being able to survive in situations that look less than favorable, then that gives them so much of a leg up. And it's honestly the way our whole family has lived its life since I first learned this technology.
I remember reading about this part, how I guess let's call them decision-making frameworks, that Morgan Stanley and other such companies use. And I mean, in your book, you talk about how we could use those frameworks in our own lives. I was wondering, could you take me through one of those scenarios?
Yeah, and we will not do it justice in like 5 minutes.
Or rather, I think what might be better. So, okay, I know your book is about this whole story, and that's something I wanted to get to your, because it's so unique. I hope you know that this idea. Okay, for those who are listening, Karena ended up touring the world, as it were, with her 3 children way back. I think it's 20 years now.
Mm-hmm.
So, could you walk me through how these principles played a role in planning and executing that trip?
Every major decision usually happens with like some seismic event that happens in your life. So it could be like, get married, or, someone passes away or whatever. In my case, I got laid off right after 9/11. And so I'd been at the company at Morgan Stanley for 16 years. And it became a decision point. And it wasn't like, because it was a 9/11 layoff, this wasn't just, one company laying off a few people. Like, I think it is still the largest layoff Morgan Stanley had ever done in its career, in its history. But similarly, at the same time, almost in the same week, practically every other company on Wall Street was laying off. Pretty much every company on Manhattan was laying off, because it was all about the economy, right? So it was 9/11 really did impact a lot of different things. So I had a choice to make at that point, which is I've invested and I've created a lot of social capital over my 16 years, I was respected. People knew what I could do. I had some pretty sweet gigs, if you like, in my career. I was very, very lucky, but I'd only worked at one company. I didn't have a broader experience, if you like. And so now I was faced with, okay, first of all, I've got to find a job. And secondly, I've got to then invest all this time reestablishing myself. Add in there the fact that, I wanted a job in New Jersey now because I'd never again wanted to be so far away from my kids in the middle of a disaster. Like, that was very, very raw for me at the time as an experience. And so I was we were at a decision point. So we basically did some scenario planning and said, all right, we have all these choices. My husband grew up in Canada, and he'd always, not always, he'd come down to work there. Originally it was supposed to be a short-term thing, and one year became 2 years, became 10 years. But also in the middle of that, they'd had the Columbine killings in high school. And that really shook my husband. And he said he was quite adamant he didn't want his children growing up in a high school where someone could bring in guns. And we knew people in our neighborhood where our kids went to perhaps play dates where there were guns in the house. And so all these factors played in together. And he had been pushing us to move back to Canada. I was resistant because this is where I'd built a life. But now we were at that pivot point. And so we basically used some scenario planning tools and basically said, all right, so scenario planning is you usually just work off two axes. So one axis for us was we stay in the US. The other, and at the other end was we move to Canada. On one side is, we're able to find great jobs. On the other side, we can't find great jobs or whatever it is. Like, so you kind of use those kind of quadrants. And then you imagine your life in each of these, and you give it a future date. So like you could give it like 30 years in the future or 20 years in the future or whatever. I know this is going to sound a little bit confusing the way I'm going to say it right now. In an ideal, so in an ideal world, so let's just say you started. So this was happening in 2002. We built out these worlds and we said, all right, so 30 years from now, if we stay in the US and we've got great jobs, what does our life look like, right? But the thing is, you're not talking about yourself as how did we get there? You're saying the year is 2032 or 2042. Yeah, 32. 2032. And I have stayed in the US and I have a good job. What does my life look like? Right? And then you actually work backwards. What had to have happened in 2030 for my 2032 life to be possible? Like, what set of circumstances? So you can actually, like, when you start creating, this is why I said about what I love about storytelling in this scenario is like, when you start off with that thing, you could be on Mars. Like, we picked that we'd be in Canada, right? But like, the world is there is nothing that is impossible when you're scenario building, because you don't know yet what circumstances are going to exist that far in the future. And so you build this future, and then you do, so that the first part is the pure fiction, science fiction world, which is like dominates my life. I love science fiction, right? So this is like spoke to that whole world building part of me, of my reading habits. And then you come back and you say, okay, so what happened 3 years before that for that to be true? And you keep walking your way back till you get to the present day. So let's just say that in 2002, we'd said, okay, 30 years from now, we're living on Mars. The first question would have been, okay, what would have had to have happened in 2028 for us to be on Mars right now? So it would have involved, like, there would have had to be someone who would have built a rocket, blah, blah, blah. And then you say, okay, what would have happened in 2025 for that 2028 situation to have existed? And then you just literally keep building your way back all the way to 2000 or 2002, whatever the year is. And what that does for you is it changes the way you anticipate the world. So I think I anticipate the world in a very different way from a lot of other people, because a lot of other people will say, because I have this in this place, therefore I will do this, right? It comes from what exists within my portfolio that makes this possible. Whereas I say, I want this to happen. What framework do I need to put in place to make that possible? Does that statement make any sense to you?
Yeah, and I think the most empowering part, at least about that, is that you can just think about whatever you want and uh have like retrofit perhaps a journey to there. Uh, that's what I think makes this the most empowering. So did you do that with I mean, even okay, before we go there, I guess for some people they might need a little hand holding for something like this. Like
Yes.
if you just say, imagine a scenario, like I mean, I know that can appeal to a certain kind of person. It would certainly to me. I'm wondering, what do you do when someone's like, I can't just, throw out a future possibility and then, like to start with. And so what happens in a situation like that? How do you advise someone like that?
So one thing I do want to make clear is that a futurist is not a forecaster. So a forecaster usually has this element of, I have to be right. What I absolutely adore about my job is that I'm perfectly happy to be wrong, because all of it is a probability and all of it is an exploration. All right? I'm happy to dream about a future where climate is solved, because what that does is it allows me to entertain the concepts of what would have to be in place for climate to be solved. But I'm also realist enough to imagine a world in which climate is not getting solved fast enough, in which case I'm trying to figure out what mitigating technologies do we need to be having in place so that someone is able to survive in this world where climate is not yet solved. Right? So the nice thing about being a futurist is that you're playing with signals. You're playing with what is in place right now. So like when I explained it to my niece the other day, and we were having a very similar conversation to yours, like, what if? And I said, what this means is that if I have a chance of putting money into someone who is developing a technology that stores energy, a better battery, that is able to store solar power, that is able to store wind power, that is where I'm going to be funneling my money. Because now I have an option on the future, if you like. Like, I'm able to create the future I want to see happen. All right? But and what that does is when people start behaving like that, then they're investing in research that makes this possible. You look at all the huge major technologies that have happened in the last century, and very often you'll see that they are clusters around the same thing, like diabetes drugs, like TNT, like nuclear fission, right? I mean, how is it possible that you have so many scientists working on the same thing? Because they all tend to cluster around one problem. And they'll come at it from different angles, and they'll come at it with different solutions, but they're all thinking about similar problems. And so you'll have the same thing happening now. Like if you have a intention, and you'll probably see Musk doing this, where he'll be investing, he'll probably be creating research projects at different universities. If he isn't doing it, then a group of governments are creating the opportunities, because they want to see these things happen. They want to see space exploration, or they want to see cleaner water, or they want to see. And so whatever it is that they want to see, they will be pushing for further research to be done in those areas. They'll be pushing the funding. So that is where being a futurist for me, so that's why I'm saying, like, the whole idea of not being 100% right is fabulous. Because if I can imagine a future where climate is not solved, I'm so happy if I'm not 100% right in that. Right? Because then it's like, okay, that didn't happen. Even though all the signals are telling me that's the way we're going to go, A forecaster might say that is what's going to happen. As a futurist, I'll say, if that is I'm actually happy if that doesn't happen, because that will mean that a whole generation of people have come in with fresh ideas and created an alternate technology that has saved the earth, or at least saved climate for us.
Wow. Okay. I think what you're saying is that for these people who need handholding, as it were, they perhaps it's an exercise in itself to try and you know dream of a different future and then work backwards. I think that's its own kind of growth.
Okay, so now, granted, we've been talking about a huge, like a variety of big things. So, that one of my children is an environmental engineer. So I think his is a good example of how this works. All right. So he wanted to do environmental engineering. He decided this when he was like in grade 10, so maybe 14 or 15 years old, right? At that point, I really don't know why. I mean, we'd traveled and we'd done other stuff. And yes, climate was a big conversation in our house. But I don't quite know why he'd picked environmental engineering. So one of the first things we ask our children to do is to go to LinkedIn and research. So whatever it is they choose to do, they choose to be, my oldest one wanted to be a sports marketing person. And so we sent them to LinkedIn and we say, look up that job role, find out who does it, find out how much they get paid, find out how long it took them to get to that position where they get paid enough, so that you understand your career arc. Like, can you come in day one and earn $100,000, or are you coming in day one and earning 20, and it's going to be 70 years old before you earn the 100,000? Like, what is your expectation? I want them, like, I don't care what they do. They just got to know that day one, they can't own a Ferrari, right? But in some jobs that they take on, they might. But anyway, so that's the whole reasoning behind come in, look at LinkedIn, start studying what was the career path for this person. How did they get to where they are? What did they have to study in order to get there? Where did they study? Like, so all my kids have done that as a basis when they were making their decisions about what they chose to do at university. And so my youngest guy went into LinkedIn. He was doing that, and very much like you, he's very much an environmentalist. He was also looking at other scholarship opportunities. And one of the things was that there is a ship that goes along the North Passage that takes I think it takes 80 people in total, 30 are students, and the rest are researchers, politicians, journalists, musicians. And so like you've got this 80-person crew that is traveling across all these indigenous populations right into the Arctic and studying. So like, it's a fascinating thing. He didn't get it, but he started talking to the people who were, the mature people who were on the crew, and talking to them on LinkedIn, because one of them was a professor in wave technology, and he looked at his LinkedIn and he goes, "Wait a second, this guy did physics, and my son really enjoyed physics." He says, like, how can a physicist be an environmentalist, was his question. So that's when he went to this guy and said, what did you do? How did you get here? Do you need a PhD, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the conversation. So long story short, he said, all right, I want to be an environmental engineer. Who hires environmental engineers? The EPA. Where does the EPA get most of the environmental engineers from? From Stanford. So he basically said, all right, so that is my path. I want to be an environmental engineer. It makes sense that I follow this sequence. And so he then went ahead and, on top of all his Canadian applications, he also invested in doing applications for the US, which meant a whole additional study because he had to sit SATs, things that we don't normally have access to here. So he did all that, and he didn't get into Stanford. And so this is the point, and I think we're coming into scenario planning. This is, I think, the difference. If his intention had been to get into Stanford, that's where our story would have stopped. But the story wasn't that he wants to get into Stanford. The story is that he wants to be an environmental engineer. And so the question then becomes, how else can you become an environmental engineer if you don't go to Stanford? Where else can you go? Right? And so he also had his Canadian applications. He got into all the universities he'd asked for there, like McGill and BC and everywhere else, and Waterloo. But he also then said, all right, I've done the Common App. I'm going to put my applications in for the other schools in the US. So ED, like, I don't know if you know the whole system in Canada, in the US, this early decision is for the first university. And if you don't get in, then you go in for regular admissions. So under regular admissions, he got into Harvard. And everyone looks at me and goes, well, your son got into Harvard. I'm like, yeah, but he wasn't aiming to get into Harvard. He was aiming to be an environmental engineer. And if that summarizes how scenario planning works, it's like you figure out a way to get to your solution. It doesn't matter how you get there. You know what I mean? Because you're setting a compass direction. You're not setting a highway. You're not going Google Maps. You're basically saying, I need to get to that point. And I don't care if I'm going by foot or if I'm going on, on a turbo train. It's like, I will get to the point I want to get to. And I think that to me is how we in our family have used scenario planning.
I think Andrew's example is perfect. I'll leave it at that. I think your children are a very interesting topic to talk about because they have not had a novel childhood from what I've understood. I think in some ways they're very lucky to have had that have had some of the experiences that they've had, and so if you could walk us through that unbelievable journey, that rather quest, I'd rather say, that you all undertook.
So again, so really what it came down to was, okay, we decided we were going to move up to Canada. And in the move, we were obviously not sure because we were selling our home, giving up our jobs. I didn't have a job. My husband was giving up his job. We weren't sure about what the future was. So I said to my husband, we haven't been to India since the kids were born. I'd like them to experience Christmas in Goa. And that's literally all it was. It was like, okay, we're going to take the kids for 2 weeks to Goa. And then we started doing the math on the tickets, and it was getting to be quite expensive. And then I'm like, wait a second. If we're going to be in Goa at Christmas, and yes, we moved to Canada, do we literally have to have been in Canada for us to be in Goa? Am I taking them out of school and putting them back in school? I mean, my oldest was going into 3rd grade. I'm like, if he misses a month of school, what's the issue? That'll actually make the tickets more affordable. So it started off with, okay, the tickets are really expensive. If I add a week on each side and make it 4 weeks, the tickets become a little more cheaper because they're in the shoulder period. And then my husband goes, well, if we do that, then maybe we can go to Nepal. I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds really good. And then it became like, well, if we add another week, we can actually do Thailand as well. So that's literally how it started. It's like this whole idea that we actually go to India for Christmas started growing. And that's also when we started using some decision thoughts and debating, did it make sense for us to have the kids settle in Canada, pull them out, go on vacation, come back again? What did that do for them? Long story short, because it is a very, very long story, how we developed everything. There were a couple of different underlying principles when we finally decided, okay, this is actually going to be something we're going to try and do. First of all, I made the decision I was going to homeschool them. So we didn't have to worry for a year about getting them in a school routine or in an academic. There were certain dates that we didn't have to worry about. The second thing we decided was it was very much a friends and family tour. It was take them to visit all the relatives. And that was a huge guiding principle. And it was important to me, obviously, for them to visit India, for them to visit England, because that's where I'm from, so that they could know my family well. But it's only years later that I realized that I think the whole 9/11 thing really jarred me a lot. And I wanted my children to have that connection. I wanted them to know that the world is so much bigger than one little place. And I think that's hopefully what I gave them in this. But that the friends and family, I think that really was, like I said, in hindsight, what drove the friends and family element of the trip. And then a big chunk was going to be India, a big chunk was going to be England, and then it was like everywhere else we threw in. And those came through just looking at places that we thought might be under threat ecologically, so that no matter how much money they might have when they grew up, they would never have that experience. So that's how we picked the places that we traveled to. So Nepal was one of them, Great Barrier Reef, East Africa for the safaris. Most places were places we knew people. But yeah, part of it was, will this place still be around for them to enjoy 20 years, 30 years from now? And I'm very, very glad we did that. They have actually, some of them, gone back to different places on the route, and they'll send back photographs. They're like, do you remember when we were there and the glacier was here and now look where it is? So things like that. And it's really interesting to see the change in topography over time. So I'm very glad we did that element. And then because I was homeschooling them, I added in a third element, which was ancient civilizations. Because I figured, the idea was that we were going to settle in Canada. But I was like, we're taking off and traveling for a year, we could end up settling anywhere in the world. Everywhere I figured you learn about ancient civilizations. So everywhere we went, that was a core part of, in quotes, our curriculum, which was they had to understand the culture, they had to understand the religion, they had to understand the arts, the, like basic elements of the culture in each country, and use that as a basis, so that when they came back into school, even if they were falling behind on math, at least I knew that the history was sorted out. So yeah, and so it ended up being 16 countries.
For those who want to hear the whole story in detail, I think you should listen to your episode on Angie's podcast. Angie creates. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's. I mean, if for those who are interested, otherwise they should buy a book. I think that'll get them more in depth into that story. I guess I'm also lucky in the sense that I've been traveling since I was young, and I often ask my parents why they took me to certain places when I was so young that that my memory sort of refreshed every day, and I didn't remember what happened before. And so, is that a conversation that you have with your children? Because I know your children were, correct me if I'm wrong, 3, 4, and 6, or something to that.
Yeah, 4, 6, and 8.
4, 6, and 8. So yeah, really young, right?
Literally, the youngest had just turned 4 that week when we left.
So, I suppose there are two sides to that. Like, I think that early exposure really maybe is foundational to who they are, but but as in remembering certain stories. I know if you could use the red ball story, because I think that's one story I think
you like
should,
that
because
story,
it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful story. And so, how this exposure sort of influences them, please.
So, one thing, I just want to go back to what you were saying about traveling when you were young. I mean, someone actually asked me when I started writing this book. So this book literally just started off as a family exercise. It was just going to be, my husband said to me during COVID, when I joined a writing group, it's like, and I didn't want to write about the future of work. He says, I've always wanted to write about the trip. And so that's how this book started, was just going to be like something for us. I think, but because I was writing it as part of a group, someone said, oh, you're so lucky that you travel. And I thought about that. I'm like, it never occurred to me that someone would call it luck. And when I thought about it deeply, I realized that for most people, travel is a luxury. For me and my family, travel is essential because our family lives all over the world. If we don't travel, we don't get to meet our family. So travel for us doesn't come from the extra money on the side. Travel is something that we plan for as essentially as we plan for education in our house. It's like, it is such an essential element of the way we live that we don't go to restaurants or we won't go to movies. So that the recreation budget that other people probably would have used somewhere else is our travel budget, because that is the only way that my family, my kids, could meet anyone in their family. So like my kids grew up in northern New Jersey around Manhattan. My family was in England. My husband's family was in Canada. So at the very least, and that's the immediate family, dispersed. My family, I'm the eldest of 29 cousins. We're on pretty much every continent. And so for my family to meet each other, travel was essential. And this is not just in my generation. This is actually going back 4 or 5 generations. Our family has always traveled. And so to me, I've never seen travel as a luxury. I've seen travel as an essential part of my culture, an essential part of my upbringing. It's almost as essential as religion, if you like, for us. So I thought that was really interesting when you said about, the travel part. And then the second part is like, so right now, like you said, it's 20 years since we've traveled. So I planned another book, which I hadn't yet finished. But meantime, what I've done is I actually have a private Substack with my children. And so every day I actually send them like the handwritten blog, all the photographs of that day, and we're trading stories about what happened that day. And I'm finding it incredibly interesting. So this is 20 years on. They're now adults. They're now working. They're now 24, 26, 28 years old. Their memories, even the 4-year-old's memory of things like, you think, all right, he's remembering because it's in a picture. He's like, oh, Mom, isn't that the hotel where such and such happened? I'm like, how do you even remember that? Like, I had to think about it because it's not in my notes. It's not, but I remember the experience. He's like, yeah, I remember that. And so my older guy goes, oh, that's the one where the car park looked like this. And, or we went in so-and-so's car. And I'm like, how the heck do you remember something going back 20 years? But they do. And that's fascinating to me. So I think travel has been good for them in that they've expanded the way they remember things. I think also the fact that we do go back and talk about it regularly is also part of almost like an essential element of memory. Someone said that to me once. They said, if you're able to bring back past memories into your current mind regularly, then it kind of keeps them fresh. So that's a good tactic for you for all your older trips. Go back and like either through pictures or whatever, remember the smell, remember the music, remember the wind and stuff like that, and you're able to reestablish yourself in those particular environments. But but you'd asked me about this little red ball story. So, what was the part that it was so exciting to you about that one?
I think just your the shock that you had, and I think what it taught you, because it was totally unexpected for you, right?
Yeah. So the story is, we were trekking in the Himalayas, and we'd gone up. This was like the second or third day, and whole series, you can read about it in the book. One of my kids fell, and we thought fractured his arm. So we ended up not going forward on the trip for that day. We thought, okay, well, let's rest, see if we can get to a doctor or whatever. Well, it turned out that he just sprained it. It was more shock that had him in that sense of not being well that day. So anyway, so now here we were in Gorapani, which is like close to 10,000 feet above sea level. But we're not trekking, right? It's like mother, father, 3 kids, and our entourage. Because one thing my husband had done very smartly, and that's what had given him the idea when he trekked through Nepal before, he's like, if these guys are carrying like a 30 or 40 pound load on their back regularly, it's going to be a dream for them to carry our kids on their shoulders, because these kids are barely weigh 20 pounds. It's like, so essentially that's what we did. We got 2 Sherpas to carry the 2 younger kids. And so basically everyone had a lighter load, because all of us were just sharing the backpacks as we went along, and the kids. And so everyone was able to take a little bit of easier way, but all the way up. But now it's like 7 people in a tea house. And normally the rhythm of the tea house is You get the people out the door in the morning, you change the sheets, you get ready for the evening crew to come in, right? But here we are, like messing around during the day. So our kids started entertaining their kids. And they had one son, and his name was Ocean. And it still fascinates me. This name was Ocean. It was like, you live up in the Himalayas and you call your son Ocean. Anyway, so they started playing soccer. And like, there's a very long story around this, and that we came back down from this whole trek, and like this had been one of the first big elements of our trip. It was like we knew we were going to go to the Great Barrier Reef, we knew we were going to go on safari, but this was like a huge trek. And so my 8-year-old, I wanted him to capture all these memories. I wanted him to actually remember what the trip was like. I wanted to remember the cloud forest. I wanted to remember, like, having I don't know if they still do it, but like, having the bath out of the, when they warm up the bath water outside the house, and you have to like, because this
I
was in
believe they do,
December,
yeah.
and you're standing there and it's like there's steam coming off you. I wanted him to write about all these little details, right? And he was just throwing a hissy fit. Huge tantrum. Long story short, 7 years later, he decides that he's going to run a fundraiser for a charity called Right to Play. And Right to Play is a charity that brings sports to war-torn countries and re-engages children whose lives have been destroyed through fighting, tribal fighting, or Rwanda, where you have even bigger issues and things like that. The whole idea being that, children lose their creativity during moments of war. And if you can start bringing back play, first of all, it opens them up. And then secondly, it creates friendships across tribes again. And that's really, really important going forward as a society that they do this. My son had always loved sports, still always loves sports. And one of the things he'd noticed on the trip was how sports was an international language, that he didn't need to know the language of the place that he was in order to be able to engage with sports. It's like whether it was hide and seek or whether it was soccer or whether it was cricket, right? He was never comfortable with the language that was being spoken, but he was still able to participate and be part of the team. And like the smile on his face each time was just absolutely fantastic. But that's why that's why sports for him was like an international language. And he knew that's one thing he wanted to work with. So after I asked him, like, why did you pick this particular charity out of all the hundreds in the world? And he says it's because on their logo, they had a little red ball. I'm like, yeah, it's like completely oblivious. And he goes, Mom, red ball. You remember like the red ball we played with Ocean? I'm like, okay. And I had to go back into all those days to find the photographs. He remembered I'd taken photographs. And he remembered that there was a red ball. And I literally had to go back and start looking and looking and looking there. Like, it's still very blurry because it wasn't a very good photograph. The little red ball. And so the lesson I think that I got was how I thought he'd completely missed the point of the trek. Like, by not taking notes, by not remembering everything that had happened, I felt a failure as a parent, because I hadn't encouraged him to capture all that meatiness, all the experiences, and encapsulate them. Like, this is what you're supposed to do. And it just literally was so humbling to me as a human being, and particularly as a parent, that I had no idea what he was going to do with this information. So I gave him the experience, and what he came out with was something that way blew my mind. I would never forecast this as something that he would do with that trek around, into Nepal. But out of that experience, he got an understanding that he could communicate in a language when he didn't have language, that he could make a difference. Do you remember the red ball? And what can I say? I was just blown away. And it just literally taught me that I cannot forecast what my kids are going to do. All I can do is offer them opportunities. What they make out of it is what they make out of it.
Wow.
It's like, I mean, look at you. Look at you. I'm sure your parents are saying exactly the same about you right now.
Yeah, I'm hearing them say the same things as I hear you narrate the story. That's so nice. I guess this thing of exposure is so. I mean, it gets me really thinking. For example, my parents used to work in Ladakh for a bit. They did like they were working on a project. They're purely out of their own like interest. This isn't part of their work. And so as a child, I remember going. And so I mean, okay, partly because it's the Himalayas, I thought about that. But uh, I have similar memories as such of maybe different colored balls or whatever. Like different stories relating to this. I think even you and even your mom, as from what I've read, you are truly a global person, as it were. You were born in Uganda, right? If I'm right, and then you're England, but you are from Goa. Then you worked in the US, and now you're in Canada. Then you toured the world. It's you're truly someone from planet Earth. I think we'll end with this last question of so at least I'm trying to. So I'm in the process of trying to think of a podcast tradition, with something that spans. I think Stephen Bartlett has that lovely one of having someone write a question for the next person.
Oh,
I'm not. Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's brilliant. His thing is that he asks the guest to write a question for the next guest without knowing who they're going to be. So it's just like something out there. I think I will leave you with one question. I think we're in a world or a media climate rather where there's a lot of pessimism floating around, and I think this is especially apt for you being a futurist. So how do you find optimism in a world that's determined to spread pessimism?
well, I think that might be one reason why I picked this as a career, because I always say, like, you cannot be a futurist if you're a pessimist, because the very word future means that you believe something's going to happen, that there's a tomorrow that will exist. So I think that helps me a lot. I have chosen to, not. I think I'm a realist, right? So, and I think you have to be that. But in that realism, and also in our human experience, I mean, I look at the fact that I'm here for, thanks to the grace of God, I'm here. I mean, like, my kids are fully aware that they have the luxuries that they have right now, all the opportunities they have right now, because people in their past have made sacrifices or have had experiences that allow them this luxury, right? And so I look at that and I say, other people have made it through famine, they've made it through war, they've made it through death and destruction and drought and floods. They've made it through is the answer, right? And so I keep holding on to that, and I keep offering that to my children as well. It's like there has never been a moment in the world's history where everything has been perfect. We've always hoped it would be, but it hasn't been. And if we can hold on to the fact that no matter how imperfect it seems, the very act of trying to aim for perfection, or trying to aim for something beautiful, allows humanity to shine. It allows us to show the best parts of ourselves and support each other. I think that's where the optimism for me comes in, and the hope comes in. And I just see people like you who literally, like, I am so incredibly proud of you, Ishan. It's like, it's only your mother could be prouder. And you're no, it's like I see everything that you do, everything that you touch, everything that you have intention about. And I think that's where the hope and the positivity and the joy comes in for me, because you know that there is going to be a future humanity on this earth, and it's thanks to people like you.
Karina, thank you for your time.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening. Before you go, I have 3 small requests to ask you. If you enjoy listening to the episode, then please subscribe. Second, please share this with someone who you think will find it valuable. You see, a lot of effort and time goes into creating these podcasts. And so by sharing it, you'll help me reach new audiences, and that'll help keep the show alive. Third, please tell me your thoughts. You can reach out to me on social media, on email, and so on, and tell me what you enjoyed, what you didn't like, and new guests and episodes that you'd like to have discussed on the podcast. Again, thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next episode.